And the manager just says, what's going on here? And this woman said, she won't let us sit down. We want to go to sit down. And I said, but Mr. Batten, that was his.
The wounds she never showed on camera. She spent decades making America laugh. She walked onto that stage night after night, gave everything she had, and made millions of people feel like the world was a little lighter than it actually was. And they loved her for it. They thought they knew her completely. The warmth, the generosity, the grace under pressure. They thought she was incapable of holding a grudge. They were wrong. In her 90s, she finally said it out loud. There were men in her life. Powerful, celebrated, famous men. Who hurt her in ways she never forgot. Men who humiliated her in public. Men who dismissed her in private. And one man who looked her in the eye inside her own home and tried to take ownership of everything she had built. She forgave where she could. She moved on where she had to. But she never pretended the wounds weren't real. This is the story of 5 men who crossed a woman the world thought was unbreakable, and what she actually felt when they did. Let's start with the name that surprises people the most. The one that, when you say it out loud, people respond with genuine disbelief. Marlon Brando. Yes, that Marlon Brando, the most celebrated actor of his generation. The man who had just redefined American cinema. The legend. And also, apparently, the man who managed to get himself permanently removed from her life with a single phone call and a single public comment that followed it. Here's what happened. It was the summer of 1972. The Godfather had just made Brando untouchable. Not just famous, but mythologized. She was asleep at home when her housekeeper woke her because the phone had been ringing without stopping. She picked up. The voice on the other end was slow, deliberate, unmistakable. He identified himself immediately. Said he'd been watching her work. At first, she assumed it was a joke. Hollywood ran on impressions and pranks, and Brando was a known target for both. But then he said something that wasn't a compliment. He told her she'd be even better if she loosened up. The way the actresses he'd spent time with had learned to. That was not admiration. That was a powerful man testing a boundary while pretending it was a favor. She ended the call as smoothly as she could manage. But she was shaking afterward. The next morning, a journalist contacted her publicist. Brando had apparently mentioned their late-night conversation publicly, framing it as a kind of praise for her femininity. Someone had leaked it, and suddenly a private phone call was a Hollywood story. When a reporter pressed Brando directly, he smiled and said she had taken the whole thing too seriously. That comedians, women in comedy specifically, were sensitive. That was the moment she understood exactly what she was dealing with. Not admiration, not even thoughtlessness. A man who had decided she was a punchline and who was comfortable saying so in front of the press. She told a friend 2 days later that she had spent her entire career fighting not to feel small, and that one conversation had made her feel exactly that way. From that point forward, her team operated under a standing instruction. If his name was on the guest list, hers was coming off. She held that line for 30 years without wavering. The second name is one that people find even harder to accept, because this man had a reputation built entirely on sophistication, elegance, and charm. The very picture of a Hollywood gentleman. And yet, what he said about her in a room full of the most powerful people in the industry was neither sophisticated nor gentle. It was cruel, and it was deliberate. It happened at a formal gala in the late 1960s. The kind of event where the industry gathered to celebrate itself. Everyone maintained a careful, practiced warmth. She had just become America's comedic sweetheart. He was being honored with a lifetime achievement recognition and sitting at the center of the room like exactly the kind of institution he had become. When the ceremony ended, she walked over to congratulate him. She was relaxed, warm, completely open. A director nearby tried to ease into a friendly conversation, mentioning that she had the whole country laughing. He didn't return the warmth. Without hesitation, in a voice loud enough for several surrounding tables to hear, he said he didn't understand what people found appealing about waving your arms around and making faces. She didn't flinch visibly. She had been in rooms like this long enough to keep her composure regardless of what hit her. But as she turned to walk away, he leaned toward a fellow guest and delivered the line that she never forgot for the rest of her life. He said she wasn't a real actress, that she was a housewife who had gotten lucky. She told a close friend later that it wasn't the dislike that wounded her. People were allowed to dislike her comedy. What wounded her was that he had chosen to say it in a way designed specifically to humiliate her in front of the people whose respect she had spent years earning. When a major studio later proposed that she co-star with him in a high-profile production, a project her entire team described as a genuine career opportunity. She declined without deliberating. Her answer was the same every time the subject came back around. She would not work with a man who treated women that way. He never apologized. She never softened. Some lines once crossed stay crossed. The third name on this list is a conflict that never fully played out in public, which is exactly what makes it so quietly devastating. He was one of the most powerful forces in television comedy. He built a franchise that reshaped what late-night television could be, that launched careers that defined a whole era of American humor. And according to people close to her, he dismissed her with a phrase so cutting that she carried it for decades. It was 1975. His new show had just launched and was immediately being described as the future of comedy television. Critics were falling over themselves, and nearly every one of them made the same observation: that she was the natural spiritual predecessor to everything the show was trying to do. That if anyone deserved to be part of this new era, it was her. The invitation never came. What came instead was a story that traveled quietly through the industry. During an internal pitch meeting, someone had suggested her name, argued, apparently with genuine enthusiasm, that her involvement would be historic. According to people who were in that room, the response from the top was immediate and dismissive. He reportedly said she was the face of old television and that his show wasn't a retirement home. Those words reached her within days. She didn't confront him. She didn't issue a public statement. She went quiet in the particular way that people go quiet when something has genuinely hurt them and they've decided not to give it the satisfaction of a visible reaction. She told people privately that she had spent her whole life pushing doors open for women in comedy, and he had slammed one shut without ever sitting across the table from her. Over the years, various attempts were made to bridge the gap. They never succeeded. When she was asked in her later years whether she had any regrets about never being part of that world, she smiled the particular smile of someone who has made her peace and answered that they hadn't needed her, and she had eventually learned she hadn't needed them either. It was elegant. It was final. And underneath it was 40 years of a door that never opened. If this story about a woman who gave so much and asked for so little in return is moving you, please share it. Someone in your life needs to hear that even the strongest people carry wounds. And that grace doesn't mean the wounds aren't real. The fourth name is the one that genuinely breaks your heart. Because this wasn't a stranger. This wasn't someone who looked at her from across an industry and decided she wasn't worth his respect. This was someone she had trusted completely. Someone she had built something extraordinary with, side by side, for years. And he broke her in front of her own crew. They had one of the most beloved comedic partnerships in television history. Audiences assumed their chemistry was matched by a genuine friendship. She assumed the same thing. She was wrong about that. It was an ordinary rehearsal day. Nothing about it should have been significant. A minor technical issue. A lighting problem that briefly affected his position on stage set off something that had apparently been building for a long time without her knowing it. He snapped. He threw his script to the floor and lit into the crew with a fury that had nothing to do with a lighting cue. He said he was tired of cleaning up someone else's mistakes. The room understood immediately that he wasn't talking about a light. She heard every word. She walked toward him quietly, with the kind of controlled calm that only comes from someone who has trained themselves not to fall apart in public, and asked him gently why he would speak to the crew that way. His response exposed something she had never once suspected. His voice rose, and he said that maybe he was finished being second on her show. That sentence didn't just hurt. It revealed years of resentment she hadn't known was there. The man she had trusted, championed, and shared the spotlight with had apparently been measuring himself against her the entire time. She walked to her dressing room and locked the door. She cried alone. 3 days later, he came back with an apology. He told her he had lost sight of why he started doing comedy in the first place. She accepted it because that was who she was. But she told a trusted friend afterward that forgiving him hadn't repaired what had broken. The show continued. Their friendship didn't survive in the same form. Some things once said in anger cannot be fully unsaid. And then there is the fifth name, the one that cuts the deepest of all, because the others were colleagues, public figures, people who occupied the same professional world she did. This one was her husband. The world knew him as her partner in every sense. Her spouse, her producer, the man who helped her build one of the most successful shows in television history. What she eventually discovered was that he had also been quietly dismantling her legacy from the inside, using her own creations to build a financial future that didn't include her name. It came to light through paperwork. Her lawyer flagged something irregular. A new production company had been registered and several concept properties tied directly to sketches from her show had been placed under it. One of them had been built entirely around her most recognizable character. Her name appeared nowhere on the ownership documents, not as creator, not as co-owner, not as contributor. When she confronted him expecting a misunderstanding, she got something worse than an argument. She got the truth. He sat back, completely composed, and told her that she was the talent and he was the brain, that he knew how to handle business. She later told a close friend that it felt like he had taken her heart and put a corporate logo on it. But even that wasn't the full weight of what was coming. Weeks later, she overheard a conversation that made everything suddenly make sense in the worst possible way. He had been involved with someone else for years. Not recently. For years. While she was carrying the entire show, raising their family, and trusting completely in the life they were building together. She went home that night and sat alone at her dining table. She told herself the truth out loud in the quiet of her own house. She said she didn't recognize the man she had married. The divorce that followed was not quiet. He fought for ownership of work she had created. The legal process lasted nearly a year and cost her enormously. Not just financially, but in the specific exhausting way that fighting someone you once loved costs you. When he died years later, she didn't attend the service. She sent white flowers and a note that wished him peace. But privately, she was honest with herself about what she felt. She said that some wounds don't actually heal with time. They just settle. She spent her whole career making people feel seen and celebrated and lighter than they were when they walked in. She gave that gift to millions of people over decades. Consistently. Generously. Without visible reservation. And through all of it, she carried these 5 stories. These 5 moments. These 5 men who chose, each in their own way, to diminish a woman who had never done a single thing to deserve it. She didn't collapse under any of it. She didn't let it harden her into someone unrecognizable. She kept showing up. She kept performing. She kept opening doors for the women who came after her, even when powerful people had tried to close those same doors in her face. That is not weakness wearing a smile. That is strength choosing where to spend itself. The world saw her grace. Now you know what it cost. If this story stayed with you, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded that the people who hold everything together on the outside are often the ones carrying the most on the inside. Like this, if you believe that grace, real, hard-won, costly grace, deserves to be honored. And stay with us, because there are more stories like this one, stories about the people we thought we knew and the truths they finally let us see.